For my first hike, I went to Golzern in the canton of Uri. I wanted to start really early, so I took the first gondola up at 6 in the morning. There were only 2 other hikers on the gondola with me, and honestly, that's exactly how I like it. The entire region around Golzern is really beautiful, and it doesn't have the masses you get at some of the more famous places in Switzerland. At 6 AM it felt like I had the mountains almost to myself. I started at the Golzern mountain station at around 1,400 meters above sea level, and from there I headed up towards Oberchäseren. The climb gets pretty steep and it definitely makes you work. It's never dangerous, but it's a serious climb and not one to underestimate. The mountains were still partly in the shadows, while the higher peaks were already starting to catch the first sunlight. The early morning light made everything feel incredibly peaceful, and apart from the occasional sound of the trail beneath my feet, it was almost completely quiet. As I climbed higher, the view slowly started to open up behind me. Golzern became smaller and smaller in the distance, while more of the surrounding peaks came into view. After Oberchäseren, the trail continues higher towards the Windgällenhütte. And this was probably one of my favorite parts of the hike. The character of the landscape gradually starts to change. The green alpine meadows become more rugged, the vegetation gets thinner, and the trail becomes increasingly rocky. With every step, it feels like you're leaving the more familiar alpine landscape behind and entering something much wilder. The mountains also start to feel much bigger as you get closer to them. Huge rock faces rise up around the valley, and you can see just how dramatic the landscape becomes once you're above the tree line. And then I finally reached the Windgällenhütte. That's when I noticed something I definitely wasn't expecting to see up here at more than 2,000 meters. Llamas. They were just walking around the hut, completely relaxed, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. It was such a random but really unique moment, and right behind the hut, in the background, I could see glaciers between the surrounding peaks. After spending some time at the hut, I started making my way down towards Golzernsee. The descent was just as beautiful, with the views constantly changing as I gradually lost elevation. Eventually, I reached Golzernsee, a small alpine lake with a very peaceful atmosphere. If you're someone who enjoys a cold water swim, it looked like the perfect place for a refreshing dip after a long and exhausting hike. What I liked most about this hike was the combination of everything. The early start, the quiet trails, the glaciers, the llamas, and all of that without having to fight through big crowds. For my second hike, I went to Sattelegg in the canton of Schwyz. And once again, I started early. My goal was Chli Aubrig, which reaches 1,642 meters above sea level. This region is another great example of what I like about central Switzerland. Absolutely gorgeous, but it still feels surprisingly quiet and untouched compared to some of the more famous hiking destinations. From Sattelegg, the trail starts quite gently. I walked through open meadows and gradually started gaining elevation. The morning was incredibly peaceful, and the further I went, the more the views began to open up. The trail winds its way through a mix of meadows, forest, and open alpine terrain, with the landscape slowly changing as I climbed higher. The entire hike is around 9.3 kilometers, with about 580 meters of elevation gain, and takes roughly 3 hours in total. It's not an extremely difficult hike, but there's enough climbing to make you work a little for the summit. The trail is also quite easy to follow, which makes it a nice option if you're looking for a mountain hike without anything too technical or demanding.
Wow, what a stunning trail that was. And it's absolutely worth coming here early in the morning. Nobody else is here and you have the full trail for yourself. I can only recommend that. I'm also really surprised, positively surprised, by the beautiful panorama you have, even though we are on a lower elevation level. Really happy.
As I got higher, I could see more and more of the surrounding landscape. The Windgällenhütte, Golzernsee and the mountains around Schwyz, including the iconic peak of Golzernsee, gradually started appearing in the distance. For the final part of the climb, the trail follows the grassy ridge towards the top. The summit is clearly visible ahead, with the open landscape stretching out in every direction. Eventually, I reached Chli Aubrig. At 1,642 meters, it isn't a particularly high mountain by Swiss standards, but that's also what makes this hike so nice. You don't have to climb above 3,000 meters to get a great mountain experience. On a clear morning like this, you can really see how diverse central Switzerland is, from the lower valleys and lakes to the higher peaks in the distance. And because I had started early, I could just sit there for a while and enjoy the view without having to share the summit with many other people. Actually, no one. That's probably one of my favorite things about these less famous hiking areas. Sometimes a quiet trail, a good viewpoint, and a peaceful morning are more than enough. For the third and last hike, I went to Glattalpsee, also in the canton of Schwyz. To get there, I took the gondola from Sali up to Glattalp. The ride itself is quite nice because you gain a lot of altitude in a short amount of time. When you get off at around 1,870 meters, the landscape is already completely different from what you see down in the valley. The plan was to do a full round hike around the lake. So I started the hike and followed the trail towards the lake. The first part of the trail was very easy, with mostly flat and straightforward terrain. It's actually a trail that I'd say is suitable for kids and even strollers, so you don't need to be an experienced hiker to enjoy it. But after a while, I noticed that the weather was changing. The clouds were getting darker, visibility was getting worse, and some of the mountains that had been clearly visible when I arrived were slowly disappearing. So, although I check the radar, the weather forecast regularly for this hike, I'm still very surprised that suddenly behind me there are dark clouds and I hear from very far thunderstorm approaching. So I'm not sure if I'm able to finish the whole hike, the trail that I planned. I'm not sure if I'm gonna really change my mind and go back, because in the mountains you never know, the weather conditions can change within a few minutes. So I don't want to get into trouble, especially in this valley here where there's absolutely nobody and you don't really find places for shelter. So I'm very close to lake, I'm very close to water. That's never a good thing.
during a bad storm coming up. So let's see.
Of course it was disappointing. I had planned to complete the whole loop and I wanted to see more of the region. I especially wanted to see the other side of the lake and get a better look at the valley from different angles. But the mountains will still be there another day. And when the weather changes in the mountains, I think it's better to listen to the conditions than to force the plan. As I started making my way back, the weather actually began to improve again. Some of the clouds started to lift. It was a little frustrating to see the conditions improving after I had already turned around, but I still didn't regret my decision. The loop hike around the lake is roughly 5 kilometers, so it's a fairly easy trail compared to the other two. It's not really the distance that makes the hike interesting, it's rather the location and the views. Instead of taking the gondola back down, I decided to walk all the way down to the valley station in Sali. So even though I didn't get to complete the full loop, I still ended up with a decent hike and got to experience the landscape from high up in the mountains all the way down to the valley.